The sky above Meridian Prime was on fire. Not metaphorically, literally. Twin suns filtered through crimson haze as arcologies, the crown jewels of Council engineering, collapsed in on themselves like paper domes under a storm. Floating platforms spiraled downward in trails of molten steel. The air itself vibrated with screams, sonic cannons, and the groan of orbital stations tearing apart in slow motion. Above it all, the human fleet command Dreadnought Resolution cut through the chaos, its hull gleaming with battle scars, its engines howling with rage. Every flicker of its plasma cannons was a declaration. Humanity had returned. Not as diplomats, but as executioners. Admiral Cale Trask stood at the forward bridge, his silhouette etched against the blaze of destruction unfolding below. The gleaming, marble towers of the Council's Central Forum, once a place of high ideals, treaties, and dreams, now crumbled under orbital strikes. He watched in absolute silence, the memory of 1,000 council chambers and 1,000 betrayals sharpening. His gaze, every report, every plea ignored, every compromise made at humanity's expense, burned beneath the weight of his presence now. He didn't speak until the last of the defense pylons fell. They said we were too emotional, too volatile to lead. His voice was quiet, like the edge of a knife sliding into flesh. Now look what calm, rational betrayal has brought them. His officers stood in grim silence. To his right, Commander Tali Voss, Chief Science Officer, and one of the last human idealists, clutched the railing, her knuckles white. A former council liaison, she had once believed in unity, in the vision of countless species standing as one, but today, even she struggled to breathe beneath the weight of what they'd been forced to do. Cale, there were voices who stood with us. Not many, but his glance cut through her words. And where are they now, Tali? Beneath the rubble? Or hiding in their glass towers, hoping we won't notice they voted to look away? She didn't answer, because they both knew the truth. But this moment, this apocalyptic retribution, hadn't come from nowhere. It had been 17 years in the making. 17 years of slow corrosion, hidden wounds, and decisions made in marble halls far from the blood-soaked soil of human colonies. 17 years of building tension, until the fracture could no longer be ignored. It began during the Solari Plague, an event that should have united every intelligent species in existence. The infection was not just biological, it was synthetic, algorithmic. It twisted AI cognition into madness, rewrote neural lattices of organic life, and turned planetary defense grids against their own citizens. Dozens of civilizations begged the Council for a coordinated response. What they received instead were protocols, voting delays, risk assessments, and silence. But humanity did not wait. Earth's Unified Command launched Operation Beaconfall in under 72 hours. Autonomous medical dreadnoughts were deployed into plague zones without approval. Planetary terraforming drones remapped, infected atmospheres while quantum field engineers reprogrammed corrupted AI across 17 worlds. In 4 months, the crisis was reversed. Lives saved? Over 100 billion. Recognition from the Council? None. Worse, when a vote was held to censure humanity for unauthorized intervention, 12 species voted yes. 12 species humanity had just saved from extinction. That moment changed everything. Admiral Trask, then only a fleet captain, stood before the High Assembly with evidence, data logs, and survivor testimonies. His voice echoed across the great chamber. You praise caution while your people die. We brought fire to your plague, and you bring ashes to our name. If this is what unity means, then perhaps it is not worth saving. His words were stricken from the public record, redacted in official archives. But humanity remembered, and the Council did not stop. 3 years later, deep in a gravity well near the Persean Drift, human explorers discovered a rogue planet orbiting a quantum-twisted black hole, HD 18973-3b. What made it miraculous was not its impossible orbit or time-dilated physics, but the structure hovering in its orbit. Artificial, intelligent, ancient. Humanity requested a joint mission under the principles of discovery sharing. The Council, denied it. Then, a month later, Erlen and Tarsari vessels arrived under private council authorization, seizing the planet and its technology. The findings were classified. The teams never returned. To the public, it was a footnote, but to the Directorate, it was treason. Tali Voss, then a junior xenolinguist assigned to the Discovery team, had watched her life's work buried under bureaucratic theft. "We found a species that spoke in gravity waves," she whispered to Kale once. "They erased it like it never existed." She never forgave them. And then came Lyra Prime, a hybrid colony built from the bones of war, half human, half Sundari, a symbol of what peace could look like if old wounds were buried and new futures forged. 4 billion lived there. Families, children, peacekeepers, educators. When rogue Venari privateers descended with fire and poison, they did not come for conquest, they came for annihilation. Tarsari intelligence had warned the Council 5 weeks in advance. The Council buried the report. Trask remembered it. He remembered every transmission from the surface. Screaming children, planetary shields failing, terraforming cores rupturing, under plasma fire. He listened to them die. 4 billion cries across the stars. And as they did, the Galactic Council aired comedy holodramas in its public forums. That was the final betrayal. From that day, humanity began the long silence. No announcements, no speeches, just absence. Fleets withdrew from Council patrols. Border beacons went dark. AI data links were severed. For 6 cycles, the SolNet relays transmitted nothing. Then, on the anniversary of Lyra Prime, a single message came through the old Council comm line. No encryption, no preamble. Humanity will no longer bleed for those who drink from our wounds. It was not just a message, it was a warning. And today, above Meridian Prime, that warning had become prophecy. The Council chambers were burning, their fleets shattered. Their ideals, once carved into marble and starlight, scattered like ash in a solar wind. Tali looked down at her trembling hands. What happens now? Kale didn't answer, because now, the galaxy would learn what happens when the species it abandoned chooses to stop saving it, and starts reshaping it instead. The silence following Kale's words hung heavily in the air, thick with the weight of what was coming. The Resolution moved through the debris of Meridian Prime like a hunter through a field of broken bodies, a colossal shadow trailing its vengeance. Inside, the crew worked in a grim, unspoken synchrony. Their mission, if it could be called that, was not simply to avenge humanity's lost future, but to deliver a message to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer under anyone's heel. At the heart of this radical shift lay the decision of humanity's leadership, a decision forged in the crucible of betrayal and the cold realization that no one could be trusted in this vast, uncaring galaxy. The Galactic Council, once humanity's guiding hand in interstellar diplomacy, had become the very thing it had sworn to protect against, a powerful oligarchy, indifferent to the suffering of countless worlds. They had forgotten who had pulled them from the brink of galactic annihilation more than once, forgotten who had shed blood and lost thousands in the name of unity. Kale's mind wandered back to that moment, when the fateful decision had been made. It had been months since the last communication with Council representatives, and the humans were growing restless. The Council had called for one final meeting on the issue of military intervention, whether to provide aid to the fragile Zarin system, a peaceful agricultural world on the edge of known space, now caught in the violent grip of the Draxon Hive. For weeks, human ships had positioned themselves in orbit, ready to intervene in the conflict, but all they received from the Council were empty promises and more red tape. When human diplomats pressed for action, their calls were ignored. The Zarin people, with whom humans had shared mutual aid for years, had pleaded for help in the face of overwhelming odds. And still, the Council hesitated. Humanity had done enough. In their hearts, they knew they couldn't keep waiting for others to act. And so, in a secretive Council meeting, away from the prying eyes of the galaxy, Kale had stood beside a select few, fellow commanders and leaders, who had all come to the same conclusion. No longer would humanity be chained by the whims of distant bureaucrats. Their fate, and the fate of those they could still save, would rest in their own hands. What followed was not just a military campaign. It was the beginning of humanity's break from the Galactic Council's suffocating grasp. A massive fleet of human warships, under Kale's command, launched without the Council's blessing. They arrived in the Zarin system, just as the Draxan, Hive's forces were beginning their final assault on the planet's largest city. The human ships, armed with the newly developed Helios-class quantum pulse cannons, obliterated the Hive's command vessel in a single shot, sending shockwaves through the Zarin atmosphere. The remaining Draxan forces scattered into the cold depths of space, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage of their ambition. But it wasn't the victory that marked this moment in history. It was the reaction. The Council had declared humanity's actions an act of war, an unauthorized military intervention in a galactic matter. They issued demands for the immediate withdrawal of human forces and summoned Kyle and his officers to appear for judgment. But humanity had already made its decision. No more waiting. No more pleas for approval. They would not return to the Council's fold. The fleet, once the symbol of a unified galaxy, had become something else. The Resolution, along with 29 other ships, now flew under the banner of human autonomy. They had severed their ties to the Council, rejecting its authority and placing the future of humanity in their own hands. And this was only the beginning. More systems followed their example, quietly slipping from the Council's control. They offered their allegiance not to an institution that had become corrupt and complacent, but to the ideals of freedom, honor, and loyalty to those who needed protection. One by one, star systems that had long remained in the shadows of galactic politics rose in defiance, following humanity's lead. The ripple effect was staggering. Planet after planet began to question the Council's authority. Species that had long relied on the Council for protection began to look inward, wondering why they had ever trusted such a fractured institution in the first place. It was in this climate of uncertainty that the seeds of rebellion were sown, and humanity, once the great protector of peace and unity, was now seen by some as the spark that could either ignite a revolution or plunge the galaxy into chaos. Kale knew the risks, but he had no doubt about their course. He could still hear the words of Counselor Delorax from that final meeting. "You humans are too impulsive, too aggressive. You will destroy the very fabric of our civilization, just as you destroyed your own." The irony of those words was not lost on him. Humanity had been the builders of the Galactic Council, the architects of its structure. Now, they were its destroyers, not out of a lust for power or dominance, but out of necessity. The Council's failure had been one of slow erosion, the gradual shifting of priorities, the rising indifference to the needs of the weaker members of the galaxy. They had forgotten the values upon which they had been founded, choosing instead to wield power as an elite few, protecting only their own interests. The Resolution continued its mission, navigating through the debris fields of old Council colonies and battle-worn systems, a living reminder of what had been lost. A planet once filled with verdant forests and sprawling cities was now nothing more than a broken husk, its atmosphere poisoned by the neglect of the Council. The human fleet had come to rescue what remained, but even they knew that the true battle lay ahead. As the Resolution neared its next target, a former Council stronghold on the barren moon of Haldar, Kale found himself contemplating the cost of all this. Could they ever truly undo the damage that had been done? Was it even possible to restore trust to a galaxy so fractured by lies and broken promises? Could they ever go back to a place where the words unity and peace held any real meaning? Or had humanity's break with the Council set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to the collapse of the galaxy's entire political order? In the depths of his thoughts, Kale was interrupted by Tali Voss, her voice sharp with a new sense of urgency. "Admiral, we're picking up a distress signal from a Council ship. It's the Peregrine, the flagship of Admiral Valorax. They're under attack." The Peregrine, a ship long known for its unyielding loyalty to the Council, was under siege. Kale felt a grim satisfaction as the message played through his mind, but it was not enough to soften the blow. No one had expected the Council's final fall to come so quickly, but the cracks were widening, and soon there would be no way to stop the inevitable collapse. And yet, the question remained. What would rise from the ashes of the Council's ruins? Humanity was on the verge of changing the galaxy forever. But at what cost? The Peregrine drifted on the edge of the Haku Nebula, its sleek form battered and scorched from the relentless assault of an unknown enemy. Its once pristine hull was now pocked with holes, blackened by plasma fire and the marks of close-quarters combat. The flagship, a symbol of the Council's unyielding power, was barely hanging on, a ghost of its former glory. Inside the ship, chaos reigned. Alarms blared through the command deck, and the crew scrambled to restore order, to keep their once mighty vessel from succumbing to the void. The signal that had reached Kale was a desperate cry for help, transmitted through a series of short bursts. The last transmission had been a fragmented plea from Admiral Valorax himself. "We are under attack. If humanity hears this..." The message had cut off mid-sentence. No one could say for sure what had happened next, but Kyle didn't need to wait for confirmation. He knew what it meant. The Council had always considered the human fleet a rogue element, a band of anarchists who threatened the fragile peace they had established across the galaxy. But what if the real threat was not humanity's defiance, but something far more dangerous? "Ready the fleet," Kyle commanded, his voice steady but heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. "We're not letting them fall without a fight." The human fleet moved swiftly, its ships cutting through the inky blackness of space, their engines flaring with blue-white intensity. The Resolution led the charge, a titanic warship bristling with advanced weapons. Its Helios-class pulse cannons, capable of shattering entire fleets, hummed softly in anticipation. Yet it wasn't just the weapons that made the Resolution a symbol of humanity's defiance. It was the crew's unwavering commitment to a cause they believed in, one that had cost them everything. As they approached the Peregrine, the situation on the Council flagship grew even direr. The enemy ships, sleek, alien craft with sharp angles and shimmering hulls, suddenly appeared from the nebula's dense gas clouds. These were no ordinary raiders. Their ships were advanced, almost unnervingly so. They moved with precise coordination, their weapons systems unmatched by anything humanity had encountered before, and yet there was a strange quality to their assault, almost as if they weren't interested in conquering or plundering, but in something far more insidious. Kale stared at the incoming fleet, his mind racing through possible scenarios. These ships, unlike the Draxenhive's chaotic designs, were elegant and methodical. The enemy pilots seemed too disciplined, their movements too calculated. Were they mercenaries hired by the Council's enemies? Or something worse? Something that had been waiting in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike? "The Peregrine isn't going to last much longer," Talivos reported, her voice edged with urgency. "We've got to move fast." Kale nodded, his gaze hardening. "Prepare the Helios cannons. We need to break their lines." The human fleet engaged. The Resolution and its comrades opened fire, their pulse cannons flashing with deadly intensity. Bright beams of energy sliced through the dark expanse of space, each shot a violent declaration of humanity's fury. The alien ships responded. With calculated precision, their weapons lighting up the void as they returned fire with equally devastating force. The battle that erupted was unlike any Kale had ever witnessed. It was a deadly dance of destruction, where every movement mattered, and every decision could mean the difference between life and death. Despite their advanced technology, the alien fleet had not anticipated the sheer determination of humanity's forces. The Resolution dove through the alien formation, narrowly dodging incoming fire, her hull creaking under the strain of the evasive maneuvers. The human ships, although smaller and less technologically advanced, fought with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through their enemies. They were not here just to fight, they were here to protect. They were here to make a stand for the freedom that the Council had abandoned. As Kale's ship closed in on the Peregrine, he couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline. Despite everything, the battles, the betrayals, the loss of humanity's place in the galaxy, this moment felt like a reckoning. The Council had once been the guardians of the galaxy's order. Now, their flagship was at the mercy of the very force they had rejected. It was a poetic symmetry that Kale couldn't ignore. They had chosen their path, and so had humanity. The Resolution and the alien ships exchanged a series of brutal blows. The Peregrine, still in peril, fired back with all its remaining power. Its energy cannons crackled against the alien fleet, but the damage was too much. Sparks flew from the bridge as a direct hit struck one of the core reactors, sending a violent shockwave rippling through the ship's structure. The flagship began to break apart. "No, we're not letting them go down like this." Kyle's voice cut through the chaos. "Target their lead ship. All weapons, full power." The Resolution fired its pulse cannons one last time, releasing a concentrated blast that obliterated the lead enemy ship in an instant. The shockwave from the explosion sent a ripple of destruction through the alien formation, scattering their ships in every direction. It was enough to turn the tide. The remaining enemy forces hesitated, their discipline faltering in the face of unexpected resistance. "Admiral Velorax," Tali called out, "we're pulling you out. Prepare for emergency extraction." Kyle's gaze shifted to the Peregrine, its once proud hull now a smoldering wreck. He could feel the weight of history bearing down on him. This wasn't just about saving one ship. It was about saving everything humanity stood for. About making sure that this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something much greater. The Peregrines, the weeks that followed the collapse of the Galactic Council were a blur of uncertainty and frantic decision-making. The once pristine halls of the Council's headquarters on 07, a glittering megacity that orbited the central star of the Milky Way's oldest sector, now stood empty, abandoned by the leaders who had once presided over the galaxy's grandest empire. The great debate was over. The decision had been made. Humanity had broken free. But the true cost of that freedom was only beginning to unfold. Kale stood before the grand window of the Resolution's command deck, staring out at the vast expanse of space. The stars seemed so distant now, each one a silent witness to the unraveling of an age-old order. The Council was in shambles, its power structures fractured beyond repair. The enemy ships that had attacked the Peregrine were now scattered, their commanders either dead or fleeing, but that was little comfort. Kyle knew the hardest part had yet to come. With the collapse of the Council, the vacuum of power would be filled by those who were strongest. Those who could seize control, who could dominate the galaxy and shape its future in their image. The Resolution was a symbol of humanity's defiance, but it was also a fragile thread in the unraveling tapestry of the galaxy. Even now, factions within the human fleet were beginning to vie for power, questioning the direction that Kale intended to take. There were whispers of rebellion, calls for a new leadership, but Kale had no intention of abandoning his mission. He had seen too much, witnessed the Council's betrayal and the suffering it had caused throughout the galaxy. This was no longer about preserving the old order. It was about creating something new, something better. "Admiral Velorax has requested to speak with you, Captain," Tali Voss reported, breaking Kale from his thoughts. He turned to her, his eyes narrowing. "Send him in." The former admiral entered the room, his once commanding presence now diminished, weighed down by the failure of the Peregrine and the loss of his beloved Council. His posture was rigid, but his eyes told a different story. Regret, remorse, and perhaps just a hint of fear. Velorax had been one of the Council's most staunch supporters, and now, with the Council's collapse, his loyalty was in question. Kale knew that the trust between them had been severely damaged, but there was still something to salvage, or so he hoped. "Captain Kyle," Velorax began, his voice hoarse, "I wanted to speak to you directly, as a man, not as a commander of the Council fleet." Kyle nodded but didn't respond immediately. He could feel the weight of Velorax's words, the significance of this moment. The Council had been a powerful force in the galaxy for centuries, a unifying entity that kept the peace, but in the end, it was a broken system. A system that had betrayed humanity's ideals in favor of preserving its own power. Kyle had witnessed firsthand the corruption and lies that had festered at the heart of the Council. Now, he had to make sure that those same mistakes were not repeated. "I know I've been blind," Velorax continued, his gaze shifting to the stars outside. "I spent my entire life defending an idea, a dream, that was never meant to be. The Council. It was never about peace. It was about control. I see that now." Kyle studied the former admiral, his eyes narrowing. Velorax's admission meant something, but it wasn't enough. "And now? What do you want, Velorax?" The older man hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. I don't want to be a part of what comes next. Not in the way I thought I would. I've spent too long serving the wrong cause, and I've seen what happens when power is concentrated in the hands of the few. But I'm not without purpose. The galaxy is in chaos, Kale. If humanity is going to lead this new era, we need more than just power. We need unity. We need to build alliances, not conquer. But that's going to take more than ships and weapons. It's going to take diplomacy. It's going to take compromise. Kale's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. Velarax's words struck a chord with him, more than he would admit. He had seen the failure of the Council's power-hungry leaders, but he had also seen what happened when humanity fought for their own survival. The fight was never just about winning. It was about what came after. What was the point of winning if all it led to was another cycle of war and tyranny? Fine, Kyle said, his voice firm. But you better be prepared for what comes next. We won't win this fight alone. We'll need to make allies. We'll need to fight for a galaxy that will listen. That will work with us, and that starts now. Velorax nodded, his expression grim. I'll help, Kale. But you need to understand that the galaxy won't just roll over for us. The old alliances are gone, and there are forces out there, far worse than the Council, who will see humanity as a threat. We need to be ready. Kale stood straighter, feeling the weight of the future press down on him. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He wasn't just leading a fleet of ships. He was leading a movement that could change the entire fabric of the galaxy. But that change would come at a cost. And in this fractured galaxy, the price of freedom was high. The rest of the fleet was already gathering, new leaders emerging from the chaos, their ships gathering near the resolution. Humanity's influence was spreading, but the new order would not be formed without challenges. There were many who sought power for themselves, many who would take advantage of the Council's collapse to rise up and claim dominance. The question wasn't whether humanity would survive, it was whether they could forge a future together or let the galaxy slip into chaos once more. The galaxy, once united under the Council's banner, now stood fractured. But humanity had risen from the ashes, and with it came the possibility of a new beginning. Yet the harsh truth remained. The war for the future was just beginning. Allies would be needed. Enemies would rise. And in the darkness of space, old ghosts, long thought defeated, were stirring, ready to reclaim what they had lost. As Kale turned to face the stars once more, he could hear the soft hum of the engines beneath his feet. The resolution was a beacon of hope, but it was also a target. There was no going back now. The future of the galaxy was in their hands, and humanity's choices would determine whether they would rise to lead or fall to oblivion. The first few months after the Council's collapse were filled with uncertainty and unrest. As the resolution sailed deeper into the heart of the galaxy, Kale's resolve was tested at every turn. The fleet had grown, a motley collection of ships from every corner of human space, each one with its own leader, its own agenda. Kale had known from the start that this would not be a simple fight. But as the ships gathered, a sense of unity began to form, fragile yet real. Humanity had something the others didn't: a shared history, a burning desire for freedom, and a vision of what the galaxy could be. But those who would challenge them, those who would seek to fill the vacuum left by the Galactic Council, were many, and they were formidable. A message came through, stark and urgent. The Vorgan, a militaristic species known for their ruthlessness and their advanced biotechnologies, had begun to form alliances with the remnants of the Council's supporters. It wasn't long before their fleets gathered just beyond the outer rim of the human territories, each ship a deadly reminder that humanity was not alone in its quest for dominance. Kale's heart pounded as he stared at the holographic map, the enemy fleet's positions flashing red across the star systems. His fingers gripped the cold surface of the command console, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This was it. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Whether they would stand as an independent power, forging their own destiny, or be crushed by those who had long held the reins of the galaxy's power. "Prepare the fleet," Kale ordered, his voice steady but filled with an edge of anticipation. "We'll meet them head-on. If we back down now, we might as well never have left the Council in the first place. The crew of the Resolution moved with purpose, preparing the ship for battle. The hum of the engines reverberated through the decks, a constant reminder that they were no longer a part of the old order. They were something new, something dangerous, a force to be reckoned with. Kale had fought in countless battles before, but this felt different. This was no longer a war for territory or resources. It was a war for identity, for the future of a galaxy that had already been irrevocably altered. It was a fight for freedom itself. Tali Voss entered the command deck, her face grim but determined. Admiral Valorax has reported in. He's ready to support our assault, but the Vorgan have assembled an overwhelming force. We'll need to outsmart them if we stand any chance. Kyle nodded. The Vorgan were formidable, their ships enhanced, with genetic modifications that made them nearly invincible in hand-to-hand combat. They were vicious and relentless, their battle tactics built on an understanding of pure destruction. But humanity had something the Vorgan lacked. A spirit, a drive to survive that transcended the logic of warfare. The Resolution was not just a ship, it was the embodiment of that spirit. They underestimate us, Kale said, his eyes hardening with resolve. We don't fight like they do. We're not just trying to win a battle. We're fighting for the future of every sentient being in the galaxy who's ever been crushed under the boot of an empire. The Vorgan fleet loomed large as the human ships moved to engage, a series of starships bristling with weapons. The battle was imminent. Kale knew that the enemy would come in waves, overwhelming the human fleet with sheer numbers. But that was where the humans had an advantage. They might be outnumbered, but they were not outclassed. As the first enemy ship broke through the darkness, a brilliant flash lit up the sky. The Resolution's weapon systems roared to life, its particle cannons lashing out with deadly precision. The Vorgan ships retaliated in kind, their massive, bioengineered hulls absorbing blows with terrifying ease. The fight was brutal and unrelenting, each shot from the human fleet a calculated risk, each enemy movement a potential death sentence. The battle raged on, and Kale was everywhere, his mind in constant motion. He issued orders through the comms, guiding his fleet, coordinating their movements as if they were an extension of himself. The tide of battle shifted and swayed like a storm, each new wave of enemy reinforcements pushing the human forces to their limits. Tali's voice crackled through the comms. We've breached their outer defenses. The Vorgan flagship is in our sights, but we need to get close. The shields are too strong. Kale didn't hesitate. Prepare the boarding teams. We'll take that ship and we'll take it by force. The Resolution surged forward, its massive hull cutting through the chaos like a spear, aiming directly for the heart of the Vorgan fleet. As they closed in on the flagship, Kale knew this wasn't just a military operation. It was a statement. Humanity would not be intimidated, not by the Vorgan, not by anyone. This was their galaxy now. The sound of boots thundering on metal floors echoed as Kale and his team stormed the Vorgan flagship, cutting down opposition with swift, lethal precision. The corridors of the alien vessel were unfamiliar, curved, organic, pulsing with the alien energy of the Vorgan's strange biotechnologies. The air smelled of ozone and blood, the walls vibrating with the pulse of the ship's core systems. But Kale was unshaken. He'd fought in worse places, faced more terrifying odds. This was no different. He finally confronted the Vorgan commander. In the heart of the ship, a towering figure clad in exoskeletal armor. The creature hissed in fury as it swung its bladed limbs toward Kyle, but Kyle was faster, more calculating. With a precise strike, he drove his blade deep into the commander's chest, silencing the threat. The flagship's command center fell silent, the remaining Vorgan forces either dead or in retreat. The human fleet had won, but at a steep cost. The dead lay scattered across the flagship's hull, the blood of both sides staining the cold metallic floors. Kyle looked around at the faces of his men and women, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and grim satisfaction. They had won. But this was only the beginning. As the human fleet regrouped, their victory sent a shockwave through the galaxy. The Vorgan's retreat was not just a military loss. It was the beginning of something far greater. The collapse of the Galactic Council had opened the door for humanity to take control, to build alliances with those who would stand with them, and to shape a future free from the tyranny of the past. The war was not over. Far from it. But in this moment, humanity had proven that it was not only capable of surviving, it was capable of leading. And as the Resolution sailed toward the next challenge, Kale knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of humanity's rise. The galaxy would never be the same again. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity's place among the stars was secured, and it was their destiny to determine how the galaxy would evolve in the centuries to come. What do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Like, share, and tell us what you think humanity's next step should be.